Hi, I'm James from Authentic Wine and Spirits, and today we're going to talk about whiskey regions. In particular, in Scotland, the regions of Speyside and the Highlands, and just explain a little bit about how they're different and how the preconceptions might not always apply to every circumstance for whiskeys from those regions. So, a little bit of context, first of all. The main reason that there is Scotch regions has a lot to do with the history of the Scotch whiskey business. And in particular, the Highlands were really a breeding ground for distilling because it's such a rugged wilderness in the north of Scotland, in the Highlands, that it really provided a great place to hide and do kind of more discreet distilling in the days before there was legal framework for distilling. So Highlanders in Scotland became famous for their little pot stills where they would make really good quality whiskey that had all sorts of flavor and richness and body. So that's kind of the general history about Highland Scotch. Now, Speyside is a small region within the Highlands, and the key thing here is that the Speyside is all adjacent to a big river that goes through Scotland, the River Spey. And not only did this provide a good water source, which is crucial for whiskey production, but there was a train that went right down alongside the river, and this showed up in the late 1800s and really provided a new route to market both for the ingredients for Scotch, but also a way to sell and ship the final product. So this really created a whole new environment where there was competition between the traditional Highlanders and the Speyside distilleries. Now, at that time, in the late 1800s, the style of Scotch kind of evolved, and there was, the creation of continuous still or grain whiskeys, which were lighter. And because of this, a lot of the Speyside distilleries were built specifically to create whiskeys that could be used in blends. Therefore, they tended to be lighter bodied, a little bit more refined, maybe more fragrant. The type of whiskey that you would want to see used in a blend, where that's more the general type of flavors that would work in that type of whiskey, depending on where you were trying to arrive at a final product. So you kind of had this dichotomy between these two styles, the more full-bodied, heavier, rich Highland whiskeys and these lighter, slightly more delicate Speyside whiskeys. Of course, it's not always true, but in general, that is kind of the history and the image of those two regions. Now, the other regions in Scotland, of course, like Islay, the Islands, or Campbelltown, these are regions that tend to be closer to the coast for most of their distilleries. And again, the water was so crucial for transport, as well as the ready supply of peat that is so common in many coastal regions in Scotland. But for today in particular, we're going to discuss those two styles, because when you get into Scotch whiskey and you encounter those two styles, it's kind of good to understand the difference between them. Now, two whiskeys I'm going to use today as an illustration of this and how often things can get reversed is very popular whiskey called the Glenmorangie Original, which is a Highland whiskey, and the Glen Alecky 12, which is a Speyside. Now, what's unusual about these two is that the Glenmorangie is a Highland whiskey. However, because it is distilled in these very tall stills that create a more delicate and brighter spirit, even though it's a Highland whiskey, it really creates a style that to me speaks more of a traditional Speyside whiskey. It's very fragrant. There's floral aromas. There's lots of bright orchard fruits and vanilla. And of course, predominantly would be matured in ex-American oak casks. Now, Glen Alecky, even though it's Speyside, would be considered a more full-bodied type of Speyside whiskey that historically you might consider more of the style you might see in the Highlands. In other words, it's very robust and has lots of body, and would be the type of whiskey you might want to mature more in a sherry cask. So in particular, this is the original batch of Glen Alecky 12-year-old, which was bottled in 2018. But you can see right off the bat, the color is darker than the Glenmorangie, and that's because there's a little bit more sherry influence in here. And so what you'll see when you taste them side by side is a little bit more richness and spice in the Glen Alecky. So it's a good chance to compare these two kind of extremes of style of single malt Scotch and see what you like more.